The gardens themselves lie closer to the house. Much of the area of the water gardens is cool and shady. Next to the water gardens lies the rose garden, which is generally thought of as being that section of the grounds most closely associated with the lady of the house. A pergola leads from the rose garden to the Marlborough Pavilion, designed as a tribute to the founder of the fortunes of the Churchill-Spencer clan, the victor at Blenheim. Alongside the archways, those two reliefs portray the Duke and his wife, the formidable Sarah Jennings, one-time friend of Queen Anne, who later quarreled with her bitterly. Inside, the Duke is memorialized in a series of murals depicting scenes at the Battle of Blenheim. Across the terrace lawn, a short walk leads to a stepped walkway across which a path leads through the orchard and past Winston's studio, where a selection of his paintings is displayed. The one in the top left corner of the screen, not on show in the studio, is titled Mary's First Speech. I think you can see that she was a chip off the old block. From the studio, one proceeds to the Golden Rose Walk, which is the most interesting feature of the entire property in my mind, other than the house itself. It is the most delightful anniversary present I have ever heard of, and in fact unique. It was a gift of yellow roses and the garden in which they were set to their parents from the Churchill children to celebrate Winston's and Clementine's golden wedding. That is their 50th wedding anniversary. The roses included most of those which were then highly regarded, but the varieties, in line with National Trust planting policy, have changed over time as older cultivars lose vitality and new ones become available. Replacements always being carefully chosen, bearing in mind the tastes of the original owner or the creator of the garden. The one here is Golden Wings, a favorite of our very own garden stalwart, Janice Tucker, who highly recommends it for gardens here in Santa Fe. But I think you might have to ask her whether it came through the winter all right. The Churchill children, being who they were in a position to persuade a number of famous artists of the period to paint a series of pictures, for free, of course, of the roses originally in the garden, preserved today in an album on permanent exhibition in the house. These four, from left to right, are All Gold by Ivor Hitchens, Golden Emblem by Augustus John, Lady Belper by Natalie Bevan, and Wheatcroft's Gold by Dennis Worth Miller. No visit to Chartwell, of course, could be considered complete without going through the house, which is in fact what most visitors do first, as you saw them doing in that earlier slide. There are two rooms which, for me at least, remain most firmly in memory. The one that most obviously constitutes the raison d'etre for the preservation of the property is Winston's study. Hilden here created a space that has become the ultimately perfect setting for a man who was an intellectual, a true aristocrat, a politician, writer, aesthete, devoted husband and father, but also a man of the people. High-ceilinged and spacious, elegantly furnished with pictures meaningful to him on the walls, it is the workspace every educated Englishman surely aspires to. I think it is also clear, which is why I have interpolated the view of the Long Library at Blenheim, seen earlier, that in this, his most intensely personal space, he was rejecting the grandiosity of his paternal heritage, in contrast to what he was doing in building his lakes. Churchill's desk certainly reflects his essential humanity and his love for his family. The dining room, on the other hand, draws one out into the garden. It would be hard to imagine a room that more perfectly connects the interior with the exterior. These extraordinarily handsome windows, stretching all the way from the floor to the low ceiling, and the light streaming through them, even on a dull day, as I can personally attest, create a sense of almost Arthurian ecstasy, delight, and optimism that to me pervades the entire property. Is it too much to think of Chartwell as the 20th century Camelot? That's what it is to me. And I hope you now see what I meant earlier when I called it cowardesque. The plants so floriferously framing those windows on the outside, incidentally, are not climbing roses, but Hydrangea petiolaris. You may already have gathered from my mention of the dramatically different attitudes of Churchill's wife and children to his patriarchal purchase, that the stresses and strains of what was a sadly dysfunctional family in many ways were never satisfactorily resolved. For the children, Sarah, an actress, quote, fondly remembered, her Wikipedia entry reads, for her role in the 1947 Fred Astaire movie, Royal Wedding, was actually much better known to the public as an alcoholic who embarked on a series of inappropriate marriages. Randolph, who never succeeded in establishing a public reputation for stability. Diana, who made a series of unsuccessful marriages, had several nervous breakdowns, and eventually committed suicide. And Mary, who alone among the siblings appears to have had a successful life, both in marriage as in a writer. For all of them, it was always and remained the beloved family home, providing them with a stable center in their chaotic lives. For Winston, it was always a refuge and an inspiration into which he poured himself. We've already seen him as a bricklayer, but he was also an artist, and scenes at Chartwell provided him with some of the most attractive subjects for his paintbrush. He was clearly very much at home there. For Clemmy, it was different. While they owned it, it was a constant worry. Could they really afford it? And deep down, she never really seems to have liked it. The reason the house and garden have survived to provide us with the truly lovely experience visitors have today is not because Clementine cared one way or the other whether it did or not. It was because of the action of those Churchill benefactors who bought it and gave it to the nation in the care of the National Trust. The commemorative plaque reads, Chartwell, the home of Sir Winston Churchill, was bought and presented to the nation in 1947 by a group of friends and admirers whose names are recorded here in gratitude by the National Trust. The National Trust is an extraordinary institution, founded in 1898, dedicated to preserving significant elements of the country's heritage for the benefit of the entire community in perpetuity. The agreement with the trust gave both, or either of them, the right to live there for their lifetimes. But after he died, she left within the year. Yet once the trust had taken over, she took to visiting regularly with apparently great pleasure. Could it be that she was a visitor by nature, always, seemingly, according to her own daughter Mary, chasing off here, there, and everywhere in order to, in Mary's and her own words, quote unquote, recharge her batteries for weeks and even months on end? And Chartwell, as we have already seen, is a great location from which to visit comparatively nearby famous locations in Kent. Scotney Castle there on the top right, for example, Leeds Castle on the top left, and the Dover Cliffs, equally dramatic from landward as from seaward in many places, and Canterbury, plus Hever, Sissinghurst, and Kent, which we have already seen, and many, many more. Even for people who are not Churchills, Kent is a visitor's paradise. Even though I do not believe Clementine loved or even liked this place much, I'm convinced that Winston did. The evidence is everywhere. From his painting of his black swans on his lake to his hand-built wall, that's him and Sarah laying bricks in 1928, to his study and his studio and indeed his house and even his garden, because his love for it pervades it. I have to end on a personal note. I hadn't decided which English garden to talk about, although we had decided that this lecture should be about an English garden. And must admit, I was much inclined to make it the Duchess of Northumberland's wonderful, very new, very different conception of a public garden at Alnwick Castle in Northumberland. But Linda Milbourne, our executive director, wanted Chartwell, mainly because I had told her about the Golden Rose Garden. And I end, therefore, with the picture of that very special part of Chartwell which first tweaked her interest. The tree on the right of the garden, appropriately, is the golden-fruited crabapple golden hornet, which I first noticed myself at the Oxford University Botanical Garden many, many years before I had ever been to Chartwell. It just stuck in my mind. This, incidentally, is the only picture I have of Chartwell that I took myself. And it is more typical of the weather at Chartwell than prevails in almost all the other pictures I have shown today. As you can see, it was raining. Thank you.